We talked a bit about Star Wars Outlaws crap with like exclusive missions being locked behind paywalls. Unfortunately, it's a mainstay in the industry. Lots of companies do it, including Ubisoft. They've been doing it for years. It's nothing new. What unfortunately is a little bit newer is the straight up delisting of games that have been popular for some time. It's really, really unfortunate. It's something we've seen coming for a long time. It's been a threat, kind of an omnipresent threat. And there probably have been some examples of popular games that get delisted and are no longer available. You know, it's one of those things with like Marvel's Avengers when they delist that, and it's like, oh yeah, you can't buy it anymore. I think Anthem's the same way. You can't buy it anymore. You can still technically play it, but you just can't buy it anymore because nobody's playing it. Because nobody's playing it, nobody really throws a fit. What's happened in the last week or so, though, is that the story has started building up higher and higher and higher with The Crew, which is a game that launched like a decade ago. And what's effectively happening is that Ubisoft has quietly delisted The Crew from digital storefronts, meaning you can't buy it anymore. And they've confirmed that the online-only game will no longer be playable from April of 2024, which, you know, this original story comes from December of 2023. This isn't like breaking news here. But now that we're in April of 2024, things are only becoming more and more clear that this is happening. This is happening. So this article from TechSpot outlines it. Ubisoft has started removing The Crew from libraries following the shutdown. And this tweet came out and said, I'm getting reports that people are having The Crew revoked on people's accounts on Ubisoft Connect. I'm not sure that even matters since they made it inoperable anyway, but many in Europe seem to think it is illegal. Maybe it doesn't change our plans either way, can only help. And then Brian Bioalpha said, can confirm they did it to me too after I reached out to them. Never replied to my support ticket, but definitely saw after I sent it. And basically the game just is no longer in their library. And yeah, naturally, this whole fiasco has Reddit and other gaming forums erupting over the fragile nature of digital ownership. As one Redditor put it, quote, you don't own any of your digital library. You just own a permission to download a copy, which they can revoke at any time they want or remove from their servers. Another lamented this as, quote, the saddest and most ruthless decision I have ever seen in gaming history. They also called for new laws to guarantee lifetime access to purchased games. Quote, I will always fight for digital media. I love all the advantages it gives to users around the world, but we need protection on the national or European level that when we purchase something, we need to have lifetime access. And with all of this, like, we've seen this coming for a long time because it's always been sort of a hypothetical that if you only buy a game digitally and you only get access to it by downloading it from a company's servers, what happens when they revoke access to the servers? What happens when the company goes belly up? What happens when there's some licensing dispute and they have to stop distributing the game because there's a lawsuit or something going on? And there was never like a super visible example of it happening with a game that people are still interested in playing, but this is an example of it happening. And what Ubisoft has said is kind of a little bit conflicting, but basically what they said initially back in December was they said it's necessary to take The Crew offline. Quote, after almost a decade of support, we will be decommissioning The Crew 1 on March 31st of 2024. We understand this may be disappointing for players still enjoying the game, but it is necessary due to upcoming server infrastructure and licensing constraints. Quote, our goal remains to provide the best action-driving gameplay experience for players and to deliver on it. We are continuing to provide new content and support for The Crew 2 and the recently launched Crew Motorfest. We thank everyone who played The Crew 1 and contributed to building this great community that lives on with The Crew 2 and The Crew Motorfest. They also elaborated on the decision in an update on its website, which also includes a message from developer Ivory Tower discussing the creation of the game and its legacy. Quote, players who ordered The Crew recently can check the refund policy on the store of their purchase if they wish to receive a refund. The publisher said the Ubisoft Store refund policy can be found here, basically saying if you bought it recently, you could get a refund, but if you bought it a while ago, you're just kind of out of luck. And here's the deal. Like, I've heard some people respond to this and just be like, oh, who cares? It's an old game. That's like a decade old. Who cares? But play the new one. If you're still playing the old game, you got your money's worth out of it, whatever. The problem is that all this says is get a new one, brokey. Yeah, it's basically the vibe. And like, I can understand that initial knee-jerk reaction, but you just have to separate yourself a little bit and go, okay, apply it elsewhere to a game that you like. Because you might not like The Crew 1, and so you're like, who cares about this? I don't care. But you have to extrapolate. You have to think dynamically, hypothetically, okay? And the problem with this is that there's no legal protection, as far as I'm aware, that prevents companies from revoking access to certain games that you have purchased. The understanding is that when you purchase a game, you get access to it and you own the game. So if you want to play it today, you can. If you want to play it in 5 years, you can. 10 years, you can, whatever. There are certain instances where maybe the game struggles to function properly, you know, with like an old school PC game that might be on a disc that you try to run. But you can usually still, like, you have the copy of the game. You can get it running if you know what you're doing, and you can maybe mod it or whatever else. But with this, it doesn't work the same way, because you don't own the copy of the game. You own access to the copy of the game. Or in other words, in some ways, like, you're renting access to the game. And there's no legal protection to prevent companies from revoking it. Now, I have no doubt that there probably are licensing agreements with some of the vehicles used in the game. There's probably some stuff, you know, the 10-year mark, because the original Crew launched, it's a 2014 game that launched on December 2nd. So my guess would be that some of the deals they made with like Lamborghini or other car brands were good for like a 10-year period, which for most online games is a very, very good life. So they're like, 10 years, this license will expire. We'll have to negotiate a new one for a sequel that should be out by then. So we'll just do that. And these licenses expire. And so then they have to delist it, can't sell it anymore, can't distribute it anymore. And so they have to cut it. Similar things happened with, for example, Mafia 3, where Mafia 3 had some amazing music. It had like old school Elvis in it when the game launched. So you'd just be playing the game and driving down the road in this sort of reworked version of Louisiana, and you would just hear Elvis on the radio. It was super cool. But they lost access to those recordings after a few years. So they patched the game to strip out all of that music that they could no longer distribute. And it was like a forced update. If you didn't update your game, it wouldn't like boot properly. It was a forced thing because the licensing deals mandated it. So I'm sure that there is a licensing dispute going on here, and they probably couldn't distribute the game anymore without, you know, like half the deals for the cars and brands that they were featuring were all expiring. So they're like, okay, we'll just delist the game and just move on, whatever. That doesn't make it okay though. Like, I don't think that should be an acceptable answer. I think they should have negotiated the contracts from the start with the assumption that gamers would have access to this game permanently, because they bought it and they should have access to it. But again, there's no regulatory or legal force behind it to cause them to negotiate contracts in a way that would protect players' interests and copies of the games. So really, as far as I can tell, the only solution to these types of things happening is to have regulators step in, either like within the EU or within the US, that come in and basically say, no, when you buy a digital copy of a game or a digital copy of a song or a digital copy of a movie, you own that copy. You have access to it. You have the rights to it. Not to use it freely or infringe on copyrights or anything, but you have the access, the right to enjoy that content and have access to it. And if there's a legally binding contract or regulation like that, then I think you would see companies starting to negotiate very differently. I think you'd start to see, I don't think you would see things like this happen anymore, because they would face stiff penalties on a large scale. And we've seen the same thing happen with like Apple, for example, where they for years and years had their own proprietary connector to their phones. And then I believe it was EU regulators came through and said, nope, you need to go to a universal standard. So you don't have like exclusive licensing access to the charging cable for your phone. You have to make it publicly available so anybody can buy a USB-C cable and charge their phone with it. And so that's what they did. And they had to do it with the new iPhones. The next ones are going to be doing it too. And they're all moving to USB Type-C, even though Apple really didn't want to do that. They had to because regulators stepped in. The one hesitancy I think I've heard from other people, and that I can also sympathize with, is that I just don't like the idea of the government regulating my hobby. I just don't like that. Like, if regulators came in and started messing around with what you can and can't do in a D&D campaign, I'd be like, okay, well, dry up. That's stupid. But in this case, the goal of regulations are to basically serve as rules to keep people playing the game fairly. And this sure don't feel fair, that you can buy a game at full price, and even if it's an older game, you just lose access to the thing you bought because there was a licensing dispute or something or other. That's just dumb. It's anti-consumer. I understand that some people are going to be like, well, it's not just Ubisoft doing this. Everybody's going to be doing this. I get it. That doesn't make it okay. You know, like that doesn't make it okay. Two wrongs do not make a right. So I think, as uncomfortable I personally am with regulators getting involved in my hobby, I do think for the sake of protecting consumers, it wouldn't just apply to video games, it would apply to other things as well. If there was like a policy set down where it's like, okay, if you're going to sell a digital asset or a digital copy of a game, a film, a novel, whatever, the user has full access and full rights to that content permanently once they've purchased it. And that should be the expectation. I think then you might even see a lot of these games like The Crew starting to launch, you know, full free to play. Maybe that's a loophole where it's like, well, they didn't buy the game, they bought microtransactions for the game. So you'd have to also have a rule in there where like they have permanent access to the microtransactions that you purchase, or like cosmetics and stuff. But then that gets tricky because it's like, okay, so they gave them full access. They let them download the files for the cosmetic thing that they bought, but it's not useful outside of the game. So it's like, so the game has to always be runnable, in which case I think all these games would have to come up with ways to get like peer-to-peer networks running or local LAN gameplay working, offline gameplay running, which I think they all should do anyways. But the frustrating thing with all of this is that we're relying, at least in the US, on like 70 or 80-year-old dudes and ladies coming up with these policies. Like, these are people that don't understand what an email is. How are they going to understand the nuances of protecting like cosmetic purchases, season pass upgrades, and DLC access for long-term ownership of video games? Like, they have no idea what a video game even is. So it just sucks that we have to rely on those types to do these these types of things to actually make a difference. But it's going to take something like that. I mean, I think without a doubt, it's going to take something like that, because these, I'm sure this was known for a long time within Ubisoft. I mean, they probably knew for the last 5 years that, oh yeah, in 2024 at the 10-year mark, we're going to have to delist it. So we'll release these other games, people move over there, and hopefully people just don't even really notice. Hubo, I can see why this can be tricky to pass as a game is a software legislation. Could be tricky to make for video games without impacting the software industry as a whole, given how old and out of touch legislators are. Yeah, I mean, it's like, so you buy, I think it would affect other things. Like if you bought a copy of Photoshop back in the day, because it used to be that you pay like $300, you go into Best Buy, you get an actual like disc with Photoshop on it, and you actually get a copy of Photoshop. Now it's all subscription based, and that might be in anticipation of regulations like this. It's also more consistent revenues and stuff. But is that like a way to get out of this, is to just have every game be a subscription model? So like you're not actually buying anything from the very beginning, from the outset, you're only renting access to it. You know, because if Netflix delists one of their movies that's exclusive to their platform, it's like, yeah, well, Netflix owns the access to it, and you're not buying the show or buying the movie when you have your subscription to Netflix. You're just buying access to basically get into the service. So it's just tricky. Like there's so many layers to this, but I think what is very clear is that this it does not pass the gut check. The gut check is, how is this allowed? How is it that I can buy a game and you can just take it away from me, even if it's an older game? How is that okay? Doesn't make any sense. And that, I think, for most people is what they're going off of. And hopefully somebody can step in that has power or authority in a governmental body to regulate these types of things, because otherwise it's going to keep happening. It might even happen more frequently as more live service games come out that, you know, launch and are dead within a year and get delisted and everything. And it's just going to keep happening. Yeah. If they passed a law, maybe the way to do it is, instead of requiring permanent access, maybe it's just a penalty. Maybe it's like, okay, if you purchase a piece of digital content and a user has their access to it revoked, you have to offer them a refund, a full refund of the original purchase price, of not just the thing that they purchased, but of all of the things that they purchased within that software. So You shut down access to Fortnite, and then all of you guys is like $15,000 skins. All of it gets refunded to you if you fill out the form for a refund. Maybe that's the way to do it. I think that could be a thing. Maybe that's a way around it. Yeah, no, exactly. The problem isn't that it's just delisted, it's that you can't play it. Like, at least they delist Avengers and Anthem, and you can still play it, you just can't buy it fresh. With this, it's fully like you just can't play it. Ridiculous. I'd be rich, yeah. The old original Mafia game has the music playing in the city removed too, because those were licensed as well. However, it can be restored easily with mods. Yeah, and that's one of those things where it's like, if I were one of these devs at the company, I'd be like, oh no, we made it really easy to mod this in. There's a folder labeled potential modder access to playable tracks or whatever. You just plop them in there. Maybe that's the way to do it. You know? I hope something happens, because it's only going to be more frequent. And, you know, I think there also need to be protections for microtransactions as well, because a lot of people are going to see that happen when they spend tons of money on whether it's live service games like a Fortnite or a Call of Duty or whatever else, and then they just do a sequel, cancel all the skins from the previous game, and move to the next one. Like, it just sucks. Yeah, the not a loophole folder. Exactly. Let's see. Silver Lightning, thank you for the 5. As an IP lawyer and game dev, I see the issue with providing files for permanent download forever. Reverse engineering content is real, since I can't. Yeah, no, well, and that's why it's like, if you give them unencrypted, like fully open access to basically make every game open source, I don't think that works. And I don't think anybody would see that as a potential solution. Whereas potentially offering or mandating returns be made available to anybody who submits it. Like, if somebody played the game, they're like, yeah, I put 1,000 hours into the game a decade ago, I don't need to go through with a refund or whatever. You could see that. But like, straight up, if one of the games in my Steam library was delisted and was getting shut down so I can no longer play it, and I got a pop-up saying, okay, this game's being shut down, you can apply for a refund here, I'd probably fill it out, even if it's been ages since I played it, because who wouldn't? It's a complicated issue. It's a very complicated issue. Yeah, nah, I'm petty. Give me that refund. Well, especially, I would imagine that the regulations would make it, like, would require it to be like, you have to notify clearly the users. So I imagine it as like, there has to be a pop-up in the Ubisoft store that says, this game is being shut down, would you like to apply for a refund? If they did that, I guarantee you a lot of these companies would not do this, because everybody's clicking that button. Drenner D, thank you for the 10. I feel like it all started back in the day with the Steam client. They claim it was to combat pirating, but its true purpose is now more clear, as PC was the testing ground for how consoles are now. I think it's easier to be on, or to be very agile on PC, whereas on console there's all sorts of waves of approval and corporate red tape and stuff. So on PC they could experiment with new ideas much quicker and faster, and I think that's why Steam pioneered a lot of this stuff. How about if they're no longer selling the game, allow someone to pirate it? If you're no longer making money on a game, you no longer want to sell it on your store, let it go to somebody else. The problem, Spider-Man, is just that, at least in the US, my understanding is that there are mandates for maintaining things like trademarks and stuff like that. So for example, if Disney owns a trademark to, well, I guess it would be 5 years ago, but like if years ago they owned the trademarks and copyrights and all of that for Mickey Mouse, and a bunch of people come out and start making commercials or movies and cartoons of Mickey Mouse, just straight up copy and pasted, clearly a ripoff of Mickey Mouse, not even trying. His name is Mickey, like, it's Mickey Mouse. If they don't sue and try to enforce their copyrights and trademarks and stuff, they can be, you can argue in court to judges that they're not being enforced. So clearly this isn't a good faith trademarking or copywriting of whatever content is in question, and you can lose access to that. That's my understanding. It's why people have asked me, like, oh, Luke, would you copyright like your name? Would you copyright or trademark like Skeptical Review or Ultimate Critique or something like that? And I was like, well, no, for one, because I don't think I have the rights to those terms or whatever. But also because if I were to do that, I would then have to go through all of the trouble anytime anybody potentially infringes on the Ultimate Critique or on a Skeptical Look videos or whatever. If somebody does something similar, I'd have to go through and like file cease and desists and all of that. Otherwise, I would lose access to it. You know, it just wouldn't work, because you'd have to enforce it. So if they were to just like start looking the other way with piracy, I could see them getting in trouble. Not to mention investors would also be like, what the hell are you doing? You know? Yeah, Nane, yes, you have to defend your intellectual property to have rights to it. It's the same in the EU. Details might be different though. Yeah. Yeah, Disney money to have full-time law firm. Yeah, basically. I mean, it's called having a lawyer on retainer. Like you have to have somebody always ready to go, basically, to sue people over these things, which is stupid, but that's just how it is. He took my thing. Red flag, red